Welcome back, everyone. One of the more, challenging things with what I do with sourcing stuff from a log and going all the way through the finished piece is that whole process takes an extended amount of time. So you might see me go out and pick up a log and then things happen and then eventually I get it sawn, get it stacked, I get it drying, and then years later it turns into, something else. This time I'm going to show you how I built this hanging bed swing thing that I made several years ago. The frame is made out of ash, and that was a log that I had picked up and chainsaw milled. So if we go back to kind of where things were at that time, I had just gotten into doing my log arch trailer thing. I had built the arch, and my initial version used the existing ramp mounts on the trailer that I had bought. The first time I went out and used that trailer, the ramp mounts sheared off, or one of them sheared off, and the other one was kind of not looking great either. And that log wasn't even that big. So I went back, I cut the whole ramp mount assembly off the trailer and built a whole new mounting system on there. And then later on that day, I went out and picked up these ash logs to try out the arch mount that I had just fabricated. So let's jump back in time. We're going back to November 2015.
First off, here is the Craigslist posting for these logs. This was from a lot that was being cleared for a new house that was being built. We'll be going after these two big ash logs. A few days later, over Thanksgiving weekend, my dad helped me unload and start milling the logs. And we started by pulling slabs off the shorter log. I cut these at 10/4 or 2.5 inches thick. Having the log propped up like this makes the cuts a lot easier. The only downside is if there's no one holding the slab, when the saw finishes the cut, it will slide down and it'll be very interesting to get the saw free. Then we switched to the longer log, mostly because I was more curious about what it was going to look like with all the limbs coming out of it. I could tell from the ends of the logs that the tree did have some carpenter ants, but until you get cutting slabs, you don't really know the extent of the damage. The shorter log had some damage, but the tunnels didn't go very far, so I knew there'd be much more damage, including the nest, in this longer log. At this point, Jordan was looking for something to do, so he brought his mill and saw over and helped me cut the rest of this log. He has a steel MS-880, which is able to chew through these cuts much faster than my 046, at about 10 minutes per cut versus 15 with my saw. Jordan also helped me stack the slabs as they were cut, and we kept cutting until after dark, which really wasn't that late. It's probably only like 5 or 5:30. So I stacked the other slabs that I had, and that shorter log sat all winter waiting to be cut. I finally got around to cutting this thing in March. For Easter weekend, my dad was in town again and he helped me stack the rest of the slabs. The higher we went, the more interesting it got, but luckily the higher we went, the smaller the slabs got, so that helped.
One and a half years later. Magnificent. Let's build this.
So for the frame, I'm going to be using ash. I have a few of these slabs that didn't turn out that great. They had some ant infestation, and the ants brought a lot of rot along. So most of the slabs from this log have a lot of dry rot and just sections that aren't that great for anything. So I'm going to pull my longer pieces out of these bigger boards and try and salvage as much material as I can to get all the smaller frame pieces. And then I have some wide cherry boards that make up the panels. So I'm going to start with the hardest parts to get, which are the long rails that will actually hang the whole bed from the ceiling. Those are a little over 7 feet long, so I need to get the straightest, clearest sections for those. And then I can get some of the smaller parts of the remainder from the slab. Now I have the second slab from the same log, and I'm going to start pulling the second long rail for the base from here. And then from the slab I can also get the upper rear rail, which is about 6 feet long. And once again I have some leftovers that I can pull some of the small parts from. I wasn't able to get the two shorter frame rails from those two slabs, so I have this shorter slab from the same log that I'll get the last two frame parts from. And with all my parts cut out of the slabs, I can start milling them up. I'll start by flattening them on the jointer and scoring up one edge. Then I'll run them through the planer to take them all to the same thickness, and then lastly I can rip them all to width. So the stock sizing I'm going for is a 2x equivalent with the rounded corners removed. So this entire project can be made from 2x6s and 2x4s with the rounded corners ripped away. So I'm going to start by making the support frame, and I'll start by cutting some parts for that to length. So for the joinery on this, I'm using the domino, but any non-integral joinery method will work, such as dowels or pocket holes, without affecting the length of the parts. So now I can lay out the matching mortises in the long rails, and I've laid out where I want that long rail to start, and that's actually where I'm going to put this fence. Same thing I used before that has the indicators for the mortise locations. Now I can put it right on the location because I have two different offsets to consider. I have the offset from the bottom of the bit to the bottom of the base of the machine. This is going to be running like this on the workpiece. I also have the offset from the face of the rail to the edge of this mortise here, which are the same thing. They're both 1/4 inch. So I can place this fence or guide for the domino directly on that line and get it in the perfect spot. I'm also going to use the slight slop option to give me a little bit of leeway side to side, just in case I don't line these up perfectly based off of my lines here. So now I'm going to start working on the uprights, both the back supports and then the front as well. And I'm going to start by putting the mortises into the underside of the uprights. And there I'm going to use 4 of the 10mm dominoes just because I have the space. So I'm going to cut them into the uprights first, and then I'll show you how I'm going to get those mortises into their correct locations onto the frame. So now again I want to use the machine vertical like this, so I need somewhere to reference this fence off of. So I have this little corner thing here. I can clamp this in place. And what that's going to do is extend the reference edge of the inside here up here so I can reference the fence off of that. And I can plunge down and make these cuts. And that'll also allow me to put a domino out here in the center of the long rail. Now with the joinery on the uprights complete, go ahead and start cutting all of the miters. and getting those joined up with dominoes as well. So I have everything mocked up here so I can get the perfect length on the top rail thing, armrest I guess, and this angled riser. So I have them all laid out like this, and that allows me to find this point right here where the two intersect and where the top of that miter needs to be in order for these two to come together perfectly and complete this kind of goofy shape. That way I know that the length on this is correct and the length on this is correct as well, given any sort of error I might have that's accumulated as I've been building this. So all I have to do is just mark this point right here onto both pieces, and it should be good to go. So now I'm going to get this curve drawn, and I've gone ahead and I've laid out the center points as well as the distance I want the curve to travel on both sides. And I set up my drawing bow to capture the curve which intersects the two outside corners as well as this point here in the middle. Now I can just get this lined up on here and draw the curve. So now I'll do the same thing up here. I have the termination points here where I want the curve to terminate, as well as the high spot here. So I need to adjust this radius so that I can get all three of those points in the curve, which will give me a consistent thickness piece. So the panels are going to come out of these two boards of cherry. I'm going to use this one here for the back panel. It's got this kind of knot thing in the middle. I'm going to center that in the panel opening, and then the two side panels will come out of this other board here from the left and the right of this knot here in the middle. Now to lay out the shape and size of the side panels, I'll use the side frames as a template to give me a guide of what size I need to make these things. I can trace around the inside of the frame and then expand the lines about 1/4 inch in all directions so if the panel fits into the grooves that I'll be cutting into the frame. So since these panels are floating, I'll be pre-finishing them, and that just makes sure that when they shrink in the wintertime, it doesn't expose a band of unfinished material. I'm using an outdoor finish on these. Even though this swing isn't going to be exposed to the elements, it's going to be under a porch. It's still kind of nice to have some UV protection, and this stuff will have that. So with the frame construction all complete and the panels ready to go, next I'm going to start making the grooves in the frame that's going to receive the panel. To do that, I'm going to use a router with a straight bit and an edge guide, and the edge guide will follow the outside faces of the frame, creating a groove wide enough for the panels. To cut the grooves on the shorter pieces, I'm using a slot cutter in the router table. Just makes it a little bit easier than trying to control a router on top of a small workpiece. And while the long rails are disassembled, I can do a last little bit of detail work. I'm going to cut off this little wedge here at the bottom just to give a little bit of a visual interest, and also drill the hole for the rope, which is going to hold the whole swing up. So I went ahead and got all the frame parts finished prepped, all nice and finished sanded, and now I'm going to start working on the glue up. I'll be doing this in multiple stages, starting with the support frame assembly and then working from there. I'm also going to use epoxy for this glue up. That's going to give me a lot of open time so I can make sure I get this thing all together all perfectly before the glue sets up. Now that the support frame is all glued up, I can add the back frame and the back panel. And then once that one's all set up, I can start adding the sides. Now, one of the last details is to add this ledger to the inside of the frame, and that's going to hold the boards to support the mattress. And I'm just going to glue that directly to the inside faces of the long rails. Now the epoxy is all set up. I'm going to do a little bit of finish prep here. I'm just going to go over all the joints to make sure they're all nice and flush and to clean up any epoxy that's squeezed out. Then I'm going to break all of the edges. I'm just going to give the frame a nice light round over to preserve the square look of the frame. But along the front edge, I'll add a much larger round over since your legs will be contacting that area. So this thing is all ready for finish. All the edges are broken. Everything feels really good and looks ready to go. So let's get finishing. So now the last thing I need are some boards in here to support the mattress. These boards will go between the ledgers and get screwed down to them. So I'll mill some stock for these. These are going to be out of some narrower ash boards, but they're essentially just 1x4s. So there we go, all done, and I'm super happy with the way this thing turned out. I really like the look, especially this little bit of this curvature here. I think that has a really cool look. And I'm making this for a friend of a friend, and they wanted a rope system for hanging it. So I picked up 3 lines of 1/2-inch sisal rope, and I braided them together to give kind of a chain kind of look, which is, I think, pretty cool. Now, I'm not really sure how much rope they're gonna need for their hanging situation, so I kind of left things a little bit goofy and long in some places, but I do have this one corner here that is set up really nicely. Let me show you how I did that. So as you can see, the main line is just 3 pieces that's just braided together in a simple braid. And then if we pan down to the connection point on the bed frame, so that line comes down through the hole and back up again. And to secure it, all I've done here is just braid it back in, following the strands back up individually, so you have this sort of double braid look down here as it's all getting tied in, which leads to a really nice connection point. And then the ends I just have sitting here for now, but if you're doing this yourself, you could kind of cut them at the right length or kind of tuck them in a little bit better. So if you want to make your own bed swing, and just like mine, I have a set of plans available on my website. I'll have a link to that down in the description. And of course, if you do make your own, be sure to share with me. I'd love to see what everybody's working on. And then lastly, of course, if you do make one of these, just make sure that whatever you're hanging this thing from can actually handle the load. The swing itself, if you choose to make it out of hardwood like I did, is relatively heavy, but that's nothing compared to the weight of people sitting on this thing. So just keep that in mind. So I think that's about it for this one.
Thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments on the swing or anything back in the shop, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.